Right, so today's episode is on fears, phobias, and Philias. So today we're going to start off talking about fears that are kind of more personal, like things we were scared of when we were younger, things we're scared of now, how deep they run, where that comes from. And then we're going to move into phobias, any phobias that we might have, sort of like more extreme and perhaps irrational fears, and talk about some of the most common ones and also some very niche ones, interesting ones that we found online, very funny ones, some kind of potentially very scary ones, some very unusual ones. I've got a couple of very, very interesting, creepy stories that go with a lot of them. And I've also found out some celebrity phobias, some of the mainstream celebrities and some kind of unusual or weird fears that you might not have expected them to have. And then finally, we're going to move on to things that people actually like, Philias, perhaps maybe even in the bedroom, in their private life, kind of things that you wouldn't expect. I mean, we've got some celebrity examples of some Philias, and then some really unusual sort of stories of people who kind of fell in love with or had attractions to some very unusual things, from inanimate objects to certain creatures and the things you find in the home. So yeah, really, really interesting episode coming up. So yeah, let's start off. You yourself, were there any fears that you kind of had growing up, or any fears that you've got now?
Growing up, I definitely had a lot of fears. I feel like growing up, I grew up as quite a fearful individual.
No way.
And I'd say less so now, but definitely when I was younger, I used to be scared of absolutely everything.
Really?
Like, genuinely, it was more so if it was anything to do with adrenaline or like theme park rides, or I would just never get involved.
Wow. So Jersey Fair, you would never go get on the rides?
I'm still to this day never been. And I think that's sort of stemmed even now to later life, where I wouldn't ever go on those fairground rides.
Wait, would you never get on a roller coaster now?
No, never. I've never been on one. Genuinely. It sort of stemmed from like losing my stomach. I'd hate that sensation as a kid.
When your stomach drops?
Yeah, when your stomach drops.
Yeah,
and some people love that. Even if I get a flight, I just hate that sensation. And then I just got in my head that I was just so closed off, I could never just overcome that barrier and ever get on a ride or do anything like that remotely, like what's fun when you're younger. So I just make up excuses when people go to the fair.
So you wouldn't even tell people that you've got this fear?
No. Oh well, I'll just say I can't come.
Wow.
Because I'm ill, under the weather.
I kind of get that, because I think with some fairground rides, I think now with social media, you can every now and then just see a horrible fairground ride accident, and because everyone's got phones, almost everyone is filming it. You can see clips of people like flying off fairground rides or them failing and going crazy. How much do you think it's a rational fear of something going wrong, and how much of it is like almost like a phobia, like an irrational fear that you just can't put your finger on why you hate it, you just hate it?
I don't think it's rational at all, because I don't even think about the risk that much. Like, it's not like a statistical thing where X amount of people die on this ride every single year, therefore I wouldn't want to go on it. It's literally like, from when I was younger, I was just so fearful of that sensation, or like even say sort of I was very sensitive to motion sickness. So getting flights, boats, things like that. So that on like 100x extreme scale,
wow,
would just be my worst nightmare. So I'd hate it.
So if someone could guarantee your safety, you still would be like, no, I don't. Yeah, I wouldn't enjoy the experience.
I'd still, maybe I could be convinced now, just because I know that there's nothing bad. In my head, I don't think anything would go wrong. The risks are very low. But I would have to I'd have to really convince myself to do it. Like it's still a fear, I'd say.
That's so interesting, because I think one of my fears is a fear of jellyfish. So really? I think it's called there's a name for a fear of stings, which is canidophobia. I think I'm pronouncing that right. But I think growing up in Jersey on an island where like there just were a lot of jellyfish, I obviously lived on the West Coast and used to surf a lot, do a lot of pier jumping. Like, I thought the idea that every single paddle on a surfboard, I could dip my hand and touch a jellyfish, used to freak me out. And so...
Did you ever get stung by one?
No, which is weird. There's no kind of like traumatic experience as a kid. I just, no matter when I'm in a body of water like the sea, in a swimming pool, I'm fine. But if I'm in the ocean, I constantly have a fear that my next stroke, I'm going to touch a jellyfish. And there are just so many jellyfish even around. I mean, less so in the UK, but you go on holiday to like Greece, Spain, especially if you go to, Thailand, Australia, where they have jellyfish like, you can get stung by a jellyfish and be gone like a minute later. There's actually a stat. Guess how many people a year die of jellyfish stings?
1 million?
Okay, this now makes the number sound really low. It's 100.
Oh, what?
But
I would have thought it'd be high. I don't know why.
Yeah, it's just the idea of just kind of like never seeing it. This is something people always find really weird. But given the choice between someone going, you've got to swim between this point and this point, and we'll either drop a jellyfish in there that's deadly or a shark, I would rather a shark. I prefer the idea of seeing the fin, seeing a big dark thing underneath me and knowing where it is, than the jellyfish that's basically the same. You almost can't tell the difference between water and a jellyfish a lot of the time, especially when there's waves and stuff. But I think that's more kind of like, so I've got the fear of being stung by them. So if I go to an aquarium, it's my favorite thing to go and watch jellyfish in a tank. Like, I think they're stunning. I think they're amazing to look at. Like, they fascinate me, and like everything about them, especially in their like scientific, like biology sense, like their life cycle, the way they reproduce, like all that kind of stuff I find fascinating. But I find like being in them, being potentially swimming alongside them terrifying. So I wonder if that's slightly more rational than perhaps your like fear of roller coasters and stuff.
But what about if you just saw a jellyfish, say, lying on the side of the shore?
Fine, yeah.
And it was dead?
Yeah, that's fine.
You wouldn't care?
Doesn't really bother me.
So it's more the thought of the potential of you touching a jellyfish. That's rational.
So it's more of a rational fear.
So it's not a visual fear.
I think the extent to which I'm scared of it is what makes it closer to a phobia, because it's like, it's every second I'm in the ocean, it's every stroke I'm just going, don't touch a jellyfish, don't touch a jellyfish. So that kind of freaks me out, and I just can't get rid of it. What other kind of fears have you got then?
So the two like most common, well, it's definitely up there, most common fears are fear of darkness, which is nyctophobia.
Two most common for you personally?
No, I'm saying general. So general, then
two
also me. So it is nyctophobia, darkness, and then closing spaces like claustrophobia.
Oh yeah.
So mine, right, is not either one, but it's a combination. So I don't mind darkness. Like if it's pitch black when I'm sleeping, I like that. I'm absolutely fine.
Yeah.
The same with like claustrophobia. If it's like it's got windows, for instance, even if I'm like in a lift, I wouldn't necessarily feel that. But if I have the combination of two, I'm terrified. So when I was younger, I was really scared of one of the like water slides in Jersey was at the Merton. There was one slide that is literally for kids, right? But it was a circular slide.
Oh, it's a big slide.
It's fairly big,
I know
but it's not fast or anything. And that also makes it worse for me. I prefer like fast, open rides or slides like that. But if I'm cramped in, and that slide I just could never do. So it was literally like I'd look down there and it's just circular darkness and it pretty much only fits in your body. So that combination of both nyctophobia, claustrophobia is something that I experience, yeah.
Now could you go down a massive water slide? So would you be able to do it now, or would you still feel that fear?
I think I've literally done it a couple of times. I didn't enjoy it.
Wow.
So it was rational, I guess, because I knew I wouldn't like that experience. And when I was older, I could kind of rationalize that and be like, it's not hard to just overcome that. Obviously, it's pretty low risk again. So I would do it, but just not enjoy the experience at all because it was just that combination. So I think even now, I would have some kind of, I'd have some form of barrier which would be like kind of stopping me. Whereas if it was like an open kind of water park or slide, I'd have no issues. I'd love it. I'm actually sorry to tell you this, but coming up in our niche phobias, I've got one that I know you're going to hate. Oh, really?
That I find fascinating, but I've got 3 stories that I think I'm really curious, but I think you're going to absolutely hate listening to. Yeah. So that'll be interesting. But let's cover fears first. So another fear I have is, so these two, I really struggle to figure out whether they're irrational or not, and they're kind of related. So one is aliens and one is zombies. And I wonder if it's a kind of almost like fear of an apocalyptic event that's kind of tying them both. But I got my fear of aliens from a movie called Signs. Have you ever seen it?
No.
It's an M. Night Shyamalan movie with Mel Gibson.
I haven't seen it. Yeah.
Really good. He sort of like lives on a farm. Aliens kind of come down. But what really like set it in for me, not only watching it as a kid and it being like a brilliantly scary movie, or at least I thought when I was a kid, I'm sure movie critics, might not necessarily agree. But the kid picks up a book and he says, like, you know, people that have given this real thought think that the only reasons that aliens would come to Earth would be to harvest us for slave labor, essentially, and turn us all into slaves, or to kill us and take our resources. And so I've always had a real fascination with space, sort of like abiogenesis and biogenesis, sort of like creating life from nothing, whether like there could be intelligent life on other planets and stuff. And I just think like, I think there is this possibility that it just could be out there because of like the size of the universe, the chances that there could be planets that could harbor life that, you know, could eventually turn into intelligent life. And we've sort of figured out that you kind of can go from the basic elements, you know, hydrogen, nitrogen, carbon, into life a lot more simply than we ever kind of thought. But anyway, and I just kind of thought like, I used to lie awake at night and just plan if aliens ever came like down to Earth, what I would do. And it took up my life, my childhood. Every night I would be like, if there are zombies, what would I do? And weirdly, my fear of zombies came from a movie called Shaun of the Dead, which I'm sure you've seen is a comedy movie. Yeah. But I think I watched it when I was so young, it just absolutely terrified me. But there are kind of two kind of things. So with zombies, have you ever seen anyone with rabies, a human?
No.
It's pretty rare. But that was another one where I kind of was like, it's kind of maybe a fear grounded in reality. Because if you see someone with rabies, these are the symptoms of a person with rabies: confusion or aggressive behavior, frothing at the mouth, muscle spasms, and seeing and hearing things. So you can really imagine, like, it wouldn't take much of that, like the rabies virus, to evolve a little bit, to change a little bit, to really make some, you know, I mean, if you're already angry and frothing at the mouth and you have violent outbursts, how far away from that is actual zombies? And obviously you can transfer rabies with a bite. So like, it's actually not far off like a zombie virus.
Did you then also throughout your childhood, did you plan what your method of attack would be in case of an apocalypse?
It was more like defense. Like I was kind of like, if zombies came, I had an attic, thankfully, in my dad's house that like when you were up, you'd like pull the ladder up with a rope. And so it would shut flat on the roof. And I knew that zombies wouldn't like be able to come up. And I was so grateful for that. But the worst one is that for my fear of aliens, so signs is they're farmers, right? And they have a cornfield and there's a crop circle. And that's how the movie starts, with like the first signs of aliens. My mum, a year later, moved to a farmhouse with a crop field outside my bedroom window. So I would look out my bedroom window at night and just see a dark crop field. And for about 2 years, I stopped living with my mum.
Really?
Just because I couldn't handle it.
That far?
I couldn't go to bed knowing that there was a crop field there.
Because I know you were saying that potentially they're closely linked to, say, rabies or some deformities that could then develop over time. But I feel like that's, for me anyway, completely irrational, where we're obviously miles off anywhere near like some sort of zombie apocalypse or any sort of zombie attack or alien attack. So where do you think it's literally instilled in you from, say, watching those movies when you're younger, or is it something that just intrigued you and then you researched into more? Yeah,
I think there's an interesting. So have you ever heard of the Drake equation? You might have come across it before. So it was essentially a number. Well, it was essentially used to estimate the number of active, communicative, extraterrestrial civilizations in the Milky Way galaxy. So it's sort of based on the rate of star creation, the fraction of those stars that have planets, the average number of those planets that might support life, and so on. But essentially, because there's so many assumptions, the range of answers of like the number of planets in the Milky Way that could sustain life is that different people with different assumptions, you know, there have been estimates where the assumptions made gave the number being almost zero, basically zero planets that can sustain life, and another assumption with 15 million. So because they're all multiples and like the math is too hard, but the kind of original equation was meant to sort of like spark a conversation about like, you know, what we're going to do if we ever actually contact aliens and stuff. But I always thought that was quite interesting, you know, the chances, like the sort of habitable planets that are potentially out there, you know, are just numerous. But then have you ever heard of the Fermi paradox? I thought this was quite interesting as well. So it's kind of the discrepancy between the lack of conclusive evidence of advanced extraterrestrial life and the apparent likelihood of its existence. So sort of, there was a 2015 article that put it this way: if life is so easy, someone from somewhere must have come calling by now. So going like, you know, if the universe is as big as it is and there's all these habitable potential planets, you know, and the chances of aliens is so likely, to some at least, that calculate it that way, why have they never, you know, why aren't they here? Why have they never reached out? Maybe it's just the size of the universe, who knows? But I think just the fact that there's a real possibility of both of them, however small that probability is, the idea of a zombie or an alien apocalypse just terrifies me to this day. I mean, nowadays I don't really think about it much, but I'd say a good chunk of my nights, maybe 3 or 4 nights a week, I'll have a nightmare where I'm either in a zombie or an alien apocalypse.
So would that trigger something? So you'd have a nightmare and then you'd think about it the next day, or would you just have random thoughts where you're like, what if, and you come up with these scenarios? Yeah,
I kind of come up with a lot of scenarios, but I mean, I grew up with it so much that I've kind of thought through almost everything, so I don't really ponder it too much now.
You've already solved everything. Yeah. You know exactly what you're doing.
Yeah. How about you? Have you got any other like deep fears, or is that?
I wouldn't say a deep fear, but this one's kind of based off past trauma. So I know a lot of the cases can be genetic, whereas some people just naturally are scared of small spaces or darkness. But this one is kind of based off a traumatic accident that happened when I was younger.
Oh, no way.
Where essentially I smashed my front teeth out. And so I was actually researching it, and it's kind of a branch off dentophobia, where like it's quite common for people to be terrified of the dentist. So more so like going to the dentist, like fear of like lack of control, someone basically operating on you, and supposedly a report figure of 5 to 15% of people have dentophobia. Wow. But this is obviously kind of different in the sense that I actually have a fear of, like, whenever I think of scenarios or measure the risk in certain scenarios, say like us cycling to the studio today, like thinking through falling off, and my worst fear is smashing my teeth, because I can almost feel that sensation when it happened.
How old were you when it happened?
I think I was like 12, something like that.
That is awful. That is
so it was like it was like my main front tooth that basically sliced open, and the nerve endings were obviously just kind of
exposed. Oh no.
And I still remember the pain to this day, where I like sucked in that first breath of air.
And you could feel the air passing your nerves.
Yeah. That whole rush, was the worst pain I've ever experienced. And so even now, because even if, say, like it's happened before where they operated on me and replaced it with a fake tooth, and that's come off before, but the nerve endings are all dead now, so it doesn't feel anything. But just the thought of seeing, say, that tooth broken apart, seeing that on the floor, brings back those memories, and I always feel at risk of smashing my teeth, and that's potentially stuck with me now for life.
Wow. Yeah, I'm not surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if the majority of people who had phobias, it stemmed from some sort of like childhood trauma. So should we move on to some phobias then?
Let's do it, yeah.
So I actually found, so you were talking about like common phobias. I found a US study that was quite interesting. So the top 5 most common phobias, according to this study, and neither of those two actually, this study at least didn't mention claustrophobia or nyctophobia. Can you guess what any of the 5 might be? Really common phobias.
Arachnophobia?
Yes, that's the number 1. Arachnophobia is fear of spiders, 31% of people. A similar one is fear of snakes, that's 22%, but that's only 3rd. The second one, funny enough, is glossophobia, which affects 26% of people, which is quite a lot, which is fear of public speaking.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
To be fair, I think most people probably are.
But I don't think that's a particular phobia, as in it's not that irrational. That is quite a nerve-wracking thing.
Yeah.
But maybe.
But then when you rationalise that, it shouldn't be nerve-wracking though.
That's true.
Because when you think as human beings, we're social beings, we want to interact, talk to other people. And so why is it suddenly scary when you're talking to your mates, but then you could speak to the exact same people, but they're all sat on a row of chairs. You're put on a stage with a mic, for instance.
Yeah.
And suddenly your like heart's racing a little faster, you're sweating.
Yeah.
Like why does that make a difference when you
maybe it's the extremity.
Yeah.
Yeah. What else is coming up? So mysophobia, I think it's, or misophobia is fear of germs, which is 13% of people.
That's common, I think. Yeah.
I think my brother might have that, because he used to, there was a period where we'd sort of finish eating dinner and he would just cover the surfaces of everything in the kitchen and living room with bleach.
Really?
And my parents were like kind of grateful because everything was like very clean.
Yeah.
But it was like almost too clean because it just smelled like chlorine all the time. And then the 5th one is cynophobia, which is a fear of dogs that affects 13% of people, which is interesting. And I think, do you know Darkest?
Yeah.
I think he might have that, because when we were in the locked-in house, we did a challenge where we sort of wore one of those suits and a dog had to like rugby tackle us to the ground.
I reckon I would be terrified.
So I think he had that.
I definitely have a mild version of that.
Really?
Yeah, genuinely.
No way. Actually, I think I have a friend, thinking about it now, that's funny. I have a friend that's afraid of dogs, and he would definitely have that as a phobia. So you were talking about your fear of dentistry. Did you have did you look at something to do with like a fear of doctors?
Yeah, so one of mine actually as well. I don't know actually how common this is, but there's one called latrophobia, which is a fear of doctors. And it's basically where, in the extreme cases, where people will literally refuse medical attention, even in like cases where they could have severe illnesses, disease, like it could get quite bad. And if they don't obviously see that medical attention, then it could worsen. So that's quite irrational, because obviously doctors are trained like for years on end for that sole purpose, to look after you. They're meant to be comforting. And I was looking into it, and main symptoms include like rapid heartbeat, dizziness, hot flushes, chest pain, and bizarrely excessive cleaning, linking to what you were saying with your brother, because people associate doctors as like unclean places, like hospitals. So that people will then react to that by excessively cleaning things, and they almost feel it as like a really unsafe environment.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So maybe your brother might have a mild version of that, where he wouldn't want to go to somewhere where, you know, it's a sea of people in a waiting room with colds, diseases that you could potentially catch.
That's kind of rational as well to an extent, because obviously, you know, we were talking about this when we were talking about cosmetic procedures, but the number of people that obviously sort of medical negligence as like a leading cause of death in a lot of the developed countries. And that's not hugely surprising, I guess, if you're already ill. Yeah. The idea of surrounding yourself by more people who are ill, sort of, I mean, the number of stories, I mean, there were people that would sort of, you know, I had a friend's grandparent who kind of went in for a broken arm into hospital and passed away because they caught a virus just in hospital.
Well,
which
exactly
is,
that, yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess that is rational.
So it's kind of rational, but I guess not to the extent where, you know, if you have like a broken, I would imagine it would be sort of people with like open wounds that would go gangrenous and they wouldn't even go see their doctor because they were so scared. But yeah, that is an interesting one.
Contrary to that, you've obviously got people who are like massive hypochondriacs, and it's like, I guess the opposite of a phobia of doctors, where people will go for the tiniest reasons, or like you go on these endless Google searches for like some mild symptoms. And I feel like that's very common.
I think I have that a little bit. I think it might be part of Google's fault, where you sort of, you know, can Google something and almost every single time it's like, this is a symptom of cancer.
Yeah, I can imagine you being the type of person who would go to a doctor and almost have already self-diagnosed yourself before you go, and you're telling him what you...
Yeah, I mean, I had a headache once, and I remember going to the hospital and being like, I think I've got occipital neuralgia. And the guy's like, you just got a headache, like go home. They kind of laughed me out. But going back to, should I do the phobia that I think you won't like? So I'm sure this is one you might have heard of before, but it's taphophobia. Have you heard of this?
No.
So it comes from the Greek taphos, meaning grave tomb, but it's the fear of being buried alive. So I can imagine the idea of waking up and being in a coffin, pitch black, is a nightmare to you. Yeah. So you might not enjoy any of this.
Surely, but, who's enjoying that?
That's
no
true.
One's enjoying that.
But I think in particular that would, like, the thought of it might raise your stress levels more than it would for me, perhaps. But you know, this was like a big thing. So it peaked in the 1700s at the time when the plague was rampant, and people feared that doctors or medical professionals would mistakenly pronounce them dead. And it was such a phenomenon at the time that in the 18th and 19th centuries, there were a large number of designs for safety coffins. So do you know what a safety coffin is? So they're basically coffins that are fitted with mechanisms to prevent premature burial and allow the occupant to signal that they've been buried alive. So a common one was they would tie strings to your head, hands and feet so you could ring a bell, you know, and then hopefully the sort of like grave, what are they called? The people who watch over graves at night.
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah, but anyway, so that they would be able to like hear the bell ring and hopefully
So
save
what,
you.
This was an experiment to test if it would work, or
people were buying and
wow.
using coffins. There was actually weirdly not one documented, at least that I could find, not one documented case of someone being saved, having been buried alive using one of these. But people were so afraid at the time. And so the reason that people were so afraid, I've got 3 stories. Are you ready for this?
Yeah, go on.
So this is a terrifying example of someone getting buried alive. Octavia Smith, 1889. So she began showing signs of a mysterious illness. Eventually, her body entered a coma-like state and nobody could awaken her. She was pronounced dead in May of 1891. It was an unusually hot May that year, and so Octavia was buried very quickly. Obviously, they didn't want the corpse hanging around very long. But a few days later, a few other people in the town began falling into a similar coma-like sleep with shallow breathing patterns, only to awaken a few days later. They then discovered it was an illness caused by the bite of the tsetse fly. I think that's how you pronounce it. And so, fearing that she had been buried alive, her husband panicked and had Octavia exhumed, thinking that she might awaken. She had, but James was too late. Octavia's coffin was airtight. He found the coffin lining had been shredded, and Octavia's fingernails were bloody. On her face was frozen a contorted shriek of terror. So she would have, like all these townsmen and villagers, woken up from this coma induced by this fly bite and found herself in a pitch black box.
That would be my worst nightmare.
Awful.
That would be awful.
Can you imagine? I mean, what would you do? I mean, she evidently tried the only thing you could do, claw your way out. And it happened again, actually. Well, I say again, but it actually happened 5 years earlier with a lady called Anna Hockwald. So she was dressing for her brother's wedding, sat down to rest in the kitchen, and when someone checked on her a few moments later, she was lifeless. Medical aid arrived and the doctor assumed she was dead and couldn't revive her. Anna's friends thought that her ears still looked pink as though blood was flowing through her. But Anna was buried the next day. But her friends then told her parents of their earlier observation. You know, they went up to the parents and were like, her ears seem pink. We actually don't think that she was dead at the time. And so her parents, you know, perplexed to the point of having to dig her back up because they couldn't deal with not knowing. They found the worst case scenario. Anna's body was turned onto her side. Her fingers were gnawed almost to the bone and her hair had been torn out by the handful. So she again had woken up and just in so much distress and pain that she had tried to claw her way out until her fingers couldn't claw anymore and she had torn hair out of her head. Isn't that just... Yeah,
so it's you're literally getting suffocated to the point... Do you think...
I was trying to figure this out actually when I first read it. What kills you could be running out of oxygen, it could be starvation, it could be... Well, dehydration.
Or even distress, like extreme distress.
Yeah, you can die from shock, I guess. Yeah. Who knows? And then this third one is a much more recent one. It's not quite being buried alive, but it's an unusual one. So a boy called Kelvin Santos in 2012, he died from pneumonia. And an hour before his funeral, after the boy had been sort of like laid sort of in preparatory stages for a few days, apparently the kid sat up in his coffin, said, "Daddy, give me some water," lay down again and didn't move. And the father took his son back to the Abelardo Santos Hospital, where doctors re-examined him and confirmed that he had died. So that they actually fear that they had wrongly proclaimed the kid dead early, and he had died of dehydration a few days later because he had essentially woken up, was so thirsty, and he had died anyway. And they kind of got to live with the fact that, you know, maybe if they had put him on a drip, he could have survived. Yeah. Isn't that awful?
Yeah, that's awful.
Thinking they had died. I mean, the roller coaster of going, my child's dead. They've just sat up and said something, thank the Lord. And then they die again. Yeah. Isn't that awful?
That's so bad.
So yeah, those stories I think will stick with me, because ever since I first read about them a few days ago, I mean, I haven't even got the claustrophobia and...
Yeah, do you think you could develop a phobia then? Because I honestly feel like when you research these case studies, you almost have that bias of thinking that it happens more than it potentially does.
True.
And then you could feel like that you could develop that phobia, or you think about things that you wouldn't necessarily do so previously.
I would never have thought about being buried alive, and now I'm a little bit freaked out by it.
But luckily they're from ages ago.
Yeah, it would never happen these days. I think I'd rather get cremated anyway, just to make sure.
Yeah.
So what other kind of weird phobias have you found?
So I had one which I feel like this one is fairly common as well, which is thalassophobia, which is the fear of the ocean or deep open water. So I guess this one is kind of rational in the sense that as of 2022, we've only actually explored 5% of the ocean. So 95% of the ocean is still unexplored. And there are a couple of like explorations that I found extremely interesting. So there's a place called the Marina Trench, which is apparently the deepest part of the ocean, and the deepest location on Earth. And only 2 people have successfully hit the bottom of that or reached the bottom of that point, which is as far as 11,000 meters, which is equivalent to 1,500 miles.
Wow.
So a lot of people kind of have that rationalized fear because, say, like Mount Everest, the tallest point in the world, thousands of people have climbed to the top of that, but only 2 people have explored the bottom of this pit bull in the ocean. And one is Victor Vescovo, who has actually the record, the deepest ever dive in the ocean, and it took him 3.5 to 4 hours to complete.
So wait, he descended. What kind of equipment was he in? A little submarine type thing, or?
So initially the depth was measured in, well, they initially thought it was 5 miles long, and that was in 1875 through a weighted source rope. And then later in 1951, so around 80 years later, the British vessel HMS Challenger put down an echo sounder and measured nearly 7 miles deep.
Wow.
Which is is insane. And the temperature is obviously just a few degrees above freezing and about 1,000 times the standard atmospheric pressure. So you could imagine the equipment that this guy had to go down in, and maybe people aren't just willing to invest all this money to explore that. But there's that's kind of what scares me, I think, part of the ocean that's just no one's really explored even 90% of it. That's almost like a mix of like, it's basically just the fear of unknown, isn't it? I mean, I hate it. It's weird. It's one I really didn't develop until my older ages. I wonder if it's partly the fear of jellyfish coming into it. But before, obviously growing up again on the island, like, you know, we like out back, you couldn't see the bottom of the, obviously we get massive waves in Jersey, so you can go really far out to sea before you're behind the break. And when we're cliff jumping and stuff, you'd go to depths where you just couldn't see the bottom. And I never used to think about it as a kid. Whereas recently, I actually went with Chris on a fishing trip when we went to Greece. And there was a bit where he was like, oh, you guys can like jump out and swim here. And I just looked down and it was like, water was crystal clear. So usually you can see the bottom, but you just couldn't. It just got darker and darker. Yeah. And I was like, something about this just freaks me out. Well, combined with the pressure and obviously the darkness, that also ties in with that. God, yeah, I'd never go down to the bottom of the Mariana Trench. No way. And there was an interesting case study as well where, because obviously it also comes from a fear of drowning, right? Which is potentially one of the worst experiences you could ever have in life. And it's difficult to kind of obviously talk to people or ever know what that feels like because, you know, people die within, say, close to a minute of being underwater. And in 2013, a Nigerian tugboat sunk with 12 seamen on board. And the cook, named Harrison O'Keefe, actually managed to find this little air pocket. And this was right at the back of the ship. And he managed to survive there for 3 days until getting rescued by some divers. Wow, I think I might have seen footage of that. Yeah, so he was sat there basically contemplating his death. He was so close to, you know, suffocating. He was high risk of hypothermia, drowning. And he basically found this tiny pocket where his head was just above the water and was managed to stay there for over 60 hours. Wow, that is can you imagine the relief? And you almost wouldn't believe it. Exactly. And he then obviously survived that through these divers that came down and found him. And then since then, he vowed never to return to the sea. Wow. So he's obviously, he's developed a phobia of deep oceans from that absolute traumatic experience. So that's kind of rationalized in the sense that I think people honestly think about that. They think of that fear of drowning. Have you ever seen the movie Open Water? No. I think it's based on a true story. So it's a bunch of people and they're kind of on holiday, but it's mainly this couple. And they get on this boat out to sea where they all go diving. And the guy is like counting, I think there's like 20 of them or whatever. And they all jump off the boat. And as they come back in, he tallies them off. So when someone gets up, he ticks them off until he's got 20. But the problem is that 2 people who come out go back in. And so when they come out again,
there's been 20 people that have gone off, 18 have come back, 2 of those 18 have gone off and come back again. And then there's a couple, just 2 of them that have stayed out there. But because 2 people have been counted twice, he ticks off 20 people and the boat goes and they come back from their scuba diving up the top of the water and there's just no boat around.
Oh, no.
And the whole movie is just them like drifting, like sticking together, going through like seeing sharks, jellyfish again. That's another one that they encounter. And I think they both ended up dying. One of them maybe one of their remains got found. It was too long ago for me to remember. But I remember watching that and just going like, that is 100% a horrible fear of mine. Like the idea of going out on a boat and just getting left behind and being in open water.
Yeah, there's nothing you can do.
With no idea of what's surrounding you in these deep oceans, like sharks, whales, killer whales, jellyfish. Yeah, I'm not surprised people would be terrified of that.
Yeah, because obviously, the terrifying part is that literally there's not an ounce or anyone near you that you could sort of help, or you can't. Yeah. There's no way of communicating that.
And how do people find you if you're a little dot in that massive ocean?
Exactly. But with that, there's actually the point which is the furthest away from any land in the world is Point Nemo, and it's 1,400 miles from anyone or anything. No ships have ever travelled through it.
Wow.
And the ocean currents keep away all the nutrients so that would normally support all the sea life there.
Oh, so it's just devoid of all life as well.
Exactly, yeah. And so that's where we normally dump all like the satellites, spacecrafts, and they kind of scatter over that entire area of 6.6 million square miles.
Wow.
So it's literally just emptiness. So I think that's the whole idea of just feeling completely isolated in the sea, and you've got that fear of, well, it's a bigger landscape than the actual land on Earth as well. So it's a terrifying thought.
That is terrifying. To go a bit lighter, I've actually got quite a funny one. So have you ever heard of a phobia called, give me a second because this might take a minute for me to pronounce.
Okay.
Hippopotomonstrosaquipedaliaphobia. Have you ever heard of that?
Never, no.
Guess what it's the fear of?
Say that again?
I'm going to be exhausted by the end of it. Hippopotomonstrosaquipedaliaphobia. It's the fear of long words.
Oh, really?
So it comes from the root. It's got roots in Latin, sesquipedalis, which means 1.5 foot long, monstrum, meaning monster, and the hippopotamus at the start is intended to exaggerate the length of the word itself and the idea of the size of the words being feared. It's a 35-letter, 15-syllable word. It's almost, you know what it reminded me of? The idea of making lisp being a word with an S in it. Just like, obviously, people who have a lisp have to say, I have a lisp.
Yeah.
They put an S in it.
It's pretty ironic.
And having this phobia, you've got fear of long words.
Yeah, and you can't say the phobia.
But that's got to be an irrational one. I would love to speak to someone who has that, and like, I wonder if looking at that word and reading it frightens them and causes them stress.
Yeah, maybe
it's linked to dyslexia and it's all just jumbled. I don't really know.
People who aren't,
it's quite funny. Yeah. What other kind of phobias have you?
So there's one as well, which is fairly common as well, which is, I don't know, you might have experienced it or know people that have, and it's a strong fear or disgust of closely packed holes.
Oh, I've seen this a lot online. I haven't got it myself. I don't understand it, but
so things like honeycomb, even strawberries or lotus heads, and it's called trypophobia.
I've heard of that. Yeah.
And there's a couple people that you do know have experienced this. One's KSI, who has got a crippling fear of holes, and also Kendall Jenner.
No way.
She said that anything from pancakes, honeycomb, or lotus heads literally will just set her off.
Yeah, see, that's a lot more of an odd, irrational one to me, because I feel like being in tight spaces and darkness, even like darkness, obviously you can see why we would evolve to be afraid of darkness. It's, unknown what kind of creature could be in there. It's a cave where there could be a bear or a wolf or something.
Exactly,
but the holes thing, I wonder where that comes from. That's so unusual.
Well, apparently it's an evolutionary response to things associated with disease or danger. For example, a coat pattern on venomous animals like snakes. So we associate it with danger, supposedly. So now that's kind of evolved over time to now even like, say, honeycomb or anything with kind of small pocketed holes. Kind of, it's that evolutionary thing of us sensing danger.
I see. That does kind of make sense. Yeah. I've actually got one that's almost the exact opposite. It's one that definitely won't have evolved into us because there was no time. It's nomophobia. So the term was coined in 2008 as a shorthand of no mobile phone phobia. Kind of what we were talking about literally was it last week on the Shower Thoughts episode? But it was coined by a study by the UK Post Office, who commissioned YouGov, which is a UK-based research organisation, to evaluate anxieties experienced by mobile phone users. And we were literally talking about it ourselves, the kind of anxiety that comes with not having your phone on you. But the study found that nearly 53% of mobile phone users in Britain tend to be anxious when they lose their mobile phone, run out of battery or credit, or have no network coverage. And so the kind of worst side effect of this, on top of everything else that might come with it, is that people with severe nomophobia are 85% more likely to pick up their mobile devices when behind the wheel. So people with nomophobia, when they're driving and they get a text,
it's a natural response.
They don't have the self-control, or their fear and anxiety is so strong that they're missing out on a supremely important text that they just have to check it, even if they're driving and it's going to put them in danger or potentially put them in jail or put other road users in danger. I
think you said 54%, right? I think it'd probably potentially be higher, but for like our own age group.
I was thinking the exact same thing.
I think
my
most
nan
people
probably wouldn't have it.
Yeah.
But our age group, I would not be surprised if it was much, much higher.
Yeah, definitely.
Weird though, isn't it? This sort of like such a recent thing. I mean, something that will have developed over 5-10 years that other generations would never understand.
Yeah.
But it's exactly what we were talking about last week.
It's almost like a response to, say, a small child, or like it's like a paternal response where you feel like it's like a loved one almost. Do you know what I mean? Like you feel lost when it's not around. I wonder if that's what it stems from, like evolution wise. Yeah,
that's true. Maybe I guess the kind of the need for us to communicate with our social pack and be linked socially and kind of fit in with the group.
So not necessarily obviously the combined tech of all the wires and the compiled technology, but more so just the fact that we communicate with loved ones and there's that sort of attachment that we associate with it.
Yeah, true. Have you got any other ones? Any other phobias?
Yeah, so there was one more that I want to talk about actually, because this one I think is completely irrational, but some people must obviously experience this. But it's phobophobia. Could you guess what that is?
Is that almost like fear of fear itself? Is that a phobia of having a phobia?
So you literally develop a kind of spiral and circle of anxiety due to fearing fear itself.
Wow. Harry Potter. Yeah, he's got that, hasn't he? When he's got the boggart, he sort of...
So it literally can't be avoided in a sense because you're causing your own self-distress.
Oh, so it really does, it spirals and just gets worse and worse. Is it... Yeah, I mean... I wonder if that's a slight fear of the unknown as well type thing, because it's kind of like, oh, I don't know what I'm going to be scared of. I don't know what's coming. Oh, I'm feeling stress. And it almost like self-elevates. I've got one final one actually that I just thought was just so unusual. So again, I feel like a lot of our ones, even the mobile phone one, ended up we were able to rationalize this. I wonder if we can rationalize this one. So this is plutophobia. So can you have a guess of what this is? I mean, do you know the Roman gods? That would be the giveaway.
I'm going to guess. I've got no idea.
Go on.
Is it like related to small objects?
No. So Pluto is the Roman god of wealth.
Okay.
So plutophobia is the fear of money or wealth.
Wow.
Sometimes they may fear either wealthy people or becoming wealthy themselves. I mean, I can kind of get why you'd be a bit weirded out by people like Mark Zuckerberg or, Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk. They've got this kind of... Billionaires like that have this kind of unusual aura about them, don't they? Especially like Zuckerberg.
But that's not the person. That's the fear of money itself, right?
Yeah, well, it says it can be a fear of wealthy people, but it is mainly a fear of money or wealth, whether it's yours or others. But yeah, so people who actually suffer from this have been known to sabotage their own careers to prevent themselves climbing the ladder earning more money and becoming wealthy. And the fear of becoming wealthy may stem... So this is where the rationalizing comes from. So the fear of becoming wealthy may stem from a fear of the responsibilities and the pressures associated with it, or the fear of being a victim of a robbery. So there's actually... This is kind of an unrelated... Well, kind of related, but the opposite. But there's actually a fear of poverty, which is peniophobia. So like a fear of just being really poor. But so I actually searched up some of the biggest fears of the super rich themselves. And so multimillionaires and billionaires, amongst them, 1 in 7 are worried that their wealth could be depriving their children of drive and ambition, which is kind of makes sense, doesn't it? You sort of
definitely.
I think it's one of those things that a lot of billionaires you tend to sort of see, at least in movies and stuff, they sort of have this resentment of their like spoiled brat kids that kind of like...
Or don't give them any money.
Yeah, exactly. Or don't give them any money. I think Bill Gates is only leaving 10 million to each of his kids, and sort of his 50...
Yeah, that's not a lot.
50, 100
well.
billion, whatever net worth is going literally to good causes around the world. I think Jeff Bezos has said the same, hasn't he, recently, that he's sort of like giving his multi-billion-dollar fortune, he's going to give it away. He's going to give it all away before he dies. But that's a big thing for them. But actually, I think for those people, it would be slightly less about what their kids, because apparently among the ultra sort of elite and wealthy, their main thing is their own health. So they're just like, I have everything I could want, but my big fear is that, I'm normal. Steve Jobs was one of those big billionaire names, and he obviously passed away from cancer, and there was nothing. Well, I don't know, actually. I think there were some people saying he went on an all fruit diet and didn't necessarily go through the main sort of like chemotherapy, radiotherapy routes, but I could be wrong. But yeah, and their other fears are just kind of standard: losing their wealth, in investments failing, their inability to support their family one day, or marital breakdowns from it, which is kind of strange. But I
guess it's kind of makes sense, because they're things that they can't purchase. So whether that be happiness in a marriage or health,
true, or well-behaved kids,
kids, yeah. So it's like it's out of their control, where they've probably gone through their life of always, I don't know, in a financial sense, being successful,
being able to get whatever they want,
getting whatever they want, and so there's a fear of lack of control.
Yeah, true.
So yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, I guess it's the kind of one kind of thing in their life that they can't plan the outcome for, or like just go, oh, it's fine, I'll get the best tutor to make my kid perfect, and my wife's always going to love me because I've got money. You never know. Yeah.
Do you think you would, if you had kids, would you let them inherit your wealth?
I don't think so. I think I would do I don't know. I've always thought if I ever became like particularly wealthy, I would definitely wait until they were a lot older till they could have it, and sort of go through because I think being a poor student, I mean, you're a student as well, like being a poor student and having to live off scraps, those were some of the happiest years of my life, sort of like, £10 for a bunch of pints and free entry to a club with your mates. Like, it makes you appreciate things that you can't buy, like time with your friends, going home for Christmas and seeing the family. It definitely makes you appreciate things where you go like, I don't need this money to have a good time.
What about your thoughts on it causing people to have a lack of drive if they have money? Do you think that's true as well?
I think so. If it kind of gets handed down to you, you don't have the same drive. I mean, you do get a lot of these, snotty, bratty kids that do grow up, and when they get given everything, being told no and having some kind of discipline. But I guess that it does partly come down to bad parenting. I'm sure there are many billionaires and multimillionaires who have raised great kids. I mean, you look at Steve Irwin, he was very, very wealthy. And his son, I don't know if you follow his son on TikTok or social media,
no,
but he's exactly like him, That'll be a multi-million-dollar family, 100%.
Oh, but he's making a name for himself.
And he's making a name and he's exactly like Steve, there was this interview that I just love from Steve Irwin, and he said, like, I don't know if you've ever seen it, but he was like, I love money. I can't get enough money. And you know what I'm going to do? Every single dollar I get, I'm going to pour into conservation. I'm going to buy, wildlife trusts. I'm going to buy farmland. I'm going to buy conservation areas, and just sort of like, it helps me achieve my goal. And that's why I love money so much. And to me, at least, it seems like his son is exactly the same. He grew up with everyone knowing who he was from day one, because obviously he was Steve Irwin's kid. All that pressure, all the money that he probably would have been able to never work a day in his life if he wanted to. But I just spat all over the mic. But he's ended up going into conservation and is now, really passionately talking about like wildlife and how to conserve species and the importance of diversity of species and stuff like that. So I think being a good parent, and obviously Steve Irwin and his wife are evidently great parents. I think they've got a daughter called Bindi who's the same. Really? But, just because you have money doesn't necessarily mean that your kids are going to end up like that.
Yeah, definitely.
You raise them right. So to finish off phobias, like I said earlier, I've got some celebrities with unusual phobias. So we'll go through a few of them quite quickly because I think it's interesting, but nothing too long to like delve into. Johnny Depp, interestingly, has coulrophobia. So do you know what that is?
No clue.
Terrified of clowns.
Really?
Which is odd because he's played like Edward Scissorhands, Jack Sparrow, the Mad Hatter, Sweeney Todd. He's done loads of dressing up in weird makeup and being weird.
Maybe that can make him even better at the role, though.
Maybe because he's so terrified of himself. He is good with those kind of roles. Rafael Nadal actually has same phobia as you. He has nyctophobia. So he's scared of the dark. You're a big tennis player as well, aren't you? So you like a bit of Rafael Nadal.
Love Rafa.
But you know, if he's home alone at night, he's so nervous he has to sleep on the sofa. He doesn't sleep in his...
Who, Rafa?
Rafael Nadal.
No way.
So he'll sleep on the sofa because he just can't deal with going to bed alone in the dark. That is extreme. Matt Damon has herpetophobia, which is a fear of reptiles. So he won't go near them unless he absolutely has to. Britney Spears has that as well. But you sort of hear Matt Damon and you think like Saving Private Ryan, Jason Bourne, bit of a tough man. He's obviously shredded, bit of a cool guy. And he's absolutely terrified of holding a snake.
Yeah, that's bizarre.
David Beckham is an interesting one. So I used to hear about, obviously being a Man United fan, a lot of his rituals. Like he used to go on the pitch, left foot, then right foot first every single time. He used to put on his boots, left foot, then right foot. I'm not sure those are the exact details, but it was something like that. But he has ataxophobia, which is a fear of disorder or untidiness. But he cannot stand mess and disorder. And it's similar to OCD. But he said he has to have everything in a straight line and everything he owns has to be in pairs. He says it really, really stresses him out if he doesn't.
No way. Well, that's Rafael Nadal has something similar as well, where he can't step on the lines on the tennis court.
Wow.
So he'll always, if you're getting close to the line, he'll kind of footstep between and then step over it. And the same with his water bottles; they have to always be perfectly aligned. So he'll often like literally fix them like chess pieces, so they're exactly in line with each other before switching sides.
Wow, has he got is he the one that has the pre-match pre-serve
exactly.
routine where he like
so
wipes one eyebrow, one shirt?
That must be related to some sort of fear he has, where if he doesn't do that, he won't win the match or the point.
Or maybe even just kind of the itchiness that he has to do it.
Yeah, I think it's just developed over time. Probably the same with Beckham, where he has to have that order. It's just like a pre-match ritual that they've always done, been successful with it, and then have to carry on that way.
Yeah, true. Matthew McConaughey has a very, very unusual one. So he has cleithrophobia, which is getting trapped in a revolving door. So he will go out of his way to go around the back of a building if he has to avoid going in a trapdoor, because he's worried he'll go in and just be trapped in like a, which is
so he wouldn't go in there.
He will avoid it at all costs. I imagine he can probably rationalize it and go through if he has to, but he probably just absolutely he probably hates it. Yeah. He probably absolutely hates it. Megan Fox has papyrophobia, so she has a fear of paper. So she's so afraid of touching dry paper that she needs her important documents to be laminated for her to touch them.
No way.
And when she reads scripts, she needs a cup of water by her side so she can dip her fingers in to turn the pages every time.
Wow.
Doesn't even lick them. It's not wet enough. Isn't that odd? Alfred Hitchcock, obviously considered by many to be one of the most influential people in sort of modern times, has ovophobia. Can you guess what that is? You might be able to guess it from the word ovophobia.
No idea.
Eggs. I was thinking like ovum. But he's got a fear of eggs. So obviously one of the greatest directors of all time, he had a tremendous fear of eggs. He hated the way the yolk would break and cascade out of the shell.
Wow.
Isn't that is an odd...
That is really odd.
The kind of odd sensations that people hate is just... It's strange.
Well, it's just so specific as well.
Very niche. I wonder if that was a traumatic thing from childhood or...
I think it's just people hate like odd textures or... Yeah. It is, I guess there's nothing really similar
to an egg breaking in a shell. Yeah. Madonna has brontophobia, which is a fear of an extremely loud but natural noise. So she is terrified of thunder and will never step outside when it's raining or thundering. Absolutely detests it. And the last one, so this is one that stemmed from a traumatic childhood event, but Adele has liridophobia, which is a fear of seagulls. So yeah, it all started when she was 9. So she was walking down a promenade in Tenby, eating a 99 flake, when this huge effing seagull came down and swiped it off her. She says she's still got a scar from its claw on her shoulder. So it must have left quite a big gash on her. And she said that she worried that it was going to take her away with it. And now she's got a genuine phobia of seagulls.
Wow.
which is strange.
That is bizarre,
isn't it? But it's funny that it comes from. So
I mean, that's a risk one though. I don't like seagulls, but I wouldn't say it's a phobia.
you know what? This is perhaps not a phobia, but I used to have a recurring nightmare that birds would swoop down and attack me. And so I would have nightmares where I'd be chased by a flock of birds and they'd all be hovering and they'd start diving like that and like peck me.
What, just
That's the
a
kind of
sea,
thing.
a sea of them,
Just
basically.
a massive, kind of cloud, a sea of them just swooping down and pecking me, which is strange. But I think the unusual, that egg one kind of ties nicely into where we're going next, which is sort of like fetishes and weird things that people are into. Because there's a lot of things that people can be interested in that are just really, really unusual. So
there's a couple of celebrity ones that I've got.
oh, okay, yeah, go on. What's one topic of celebrities? Give us some
So
weird celebrity
fetishes.
Yeah.
So obviously Rihanna released the song S&M.
Is that Whips and Chains Excite Me?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Which is related apparently to her own fetish. So it's something that she actually has experienced, and she likes to be tied up, and that song was actually about her own kind of experiences. So there's that one. There's also James Franco. Apparently rabbits turn him on.
What?
Yeah.
That's weird.
So
that shouldn't be allowed.
He can't explain it. But rabbits apparently do. That's just, that's
I
what he came
hope
out
it's
to.
just
Yeah, hopefully that's not true.
they're not involved.
Hopefully he doesn't have a load of
You know
rabbits at
what?
home.
I understand Lola. Have you ever seen, oh my goodness, what was that basketball movie? Space Jam. Have you ever seen Space Jam?
No.
You should watch it.
Okay.
I think it's Michael Jordan.
Yeah.
And it's like cartoons coming into the real world and they play basketball.
Wait, with like Bugs Bunny in there.
Yeah,
I've seen that.
And you know the female Bugs Bunny, Lola Bunny?
Yeah.
I remember being 8 years old and she came on the screen for the first time and I was like, oh my sweet Lord, she is a
So
freaking
you can
worldie.
relate then? You can relate?
I don't think it was the fact. It was definitely the anthropomorphic side of her that I was attracted to.
And then Angelina Jolie, apparently a fetish for blood.
Ooh, that's weird.
So, so she's had moments where her and her boyfriend have had intimate experiences and she's like grabbed the knife and cut herself.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean...
Gosh, that's quite dark.
I don't want to be spreading rumours, but this is generally what I read. And apparently he cut her back. She cut him and he cut her.
Wow.
And they had an exchange of something covered in blood and her heart was racing. So she gets some sort of adrenaline hit from that.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is weird.
What about you? Have you got any celebrity examples or more just...
Not celebrity examples. So I was kind of curious what the top ones were, like how common they were. And so the most Googled ones, monthly averages, feet is number one. And feet I just do not get at all. And it's one where, I don't know if you've come across this, but there's this page called WikiFeet and loads of my friends are on it and they absolutely hate it. So people who have this interest in feet have this website called WikiFeet where they basically, if there's like a YouTube video where like, you know, Cristiano Ronaldo's taking his socks off to change shoes, they'll screenshot it and upload it. So it's not like it's not like an OnlyFans where they're uploading their own feed. It's people that are capturing it. Like, you know, there's a picture on my Instagram of me when I'm on the beach, just in my swim shorts.
And you're on
and I wouldn't, well, no, I'm probably not relevant enough to be. But like, that's the kind of thing where, you know, I don't have to upload the content myself to be on there, which is kind of feet. So that's 368,000 searches a month. The second one is primal, the primal fetish, which is kind of going back to primitive ways, everything being kind of rough and animalistic, which I don't necessarily know as a fetish, as opposed to more of like a style of intimacy that you prefer. But I definitely can understand that one. Third is armpits, which I don't understand at all, but I think people have a thing for armpits. I guess they kind of look like female body parts. I think if you kind of go like that.
The bodily odor, like people are really attracted to other people's scent and pheromones.
Girls do TikToks about that all the time, don't they? Like sniffing my boyfriend's armpits. Like, do I like this?
I think
I do like this.
Yeah, that probably is a thing.
That's a bit of an evolutionary thing. This is vile. I've heard this word on the internet, but I had to Google what it meant. Scat, which is feces related. Moving on quickly. Crush.
Sorry,
so,
that was...
Yeah, weird.
That's don't
want
horrid imagery.
Yeah. Crush is one.
Okay.
Is next up, which is people love the idea of just being crushed, like squashed.
Oh, okay, yeah. That actually links to one I had as well, which is it's related to dominance. So it's BDSM. And 93% of men, 96% of women have fantasized about some aspect of BDSM before in their lifetime. So it's erotic practices involving bondage, discipline, dominance, and submission.
I think that's probably quite I'm not surprised they're in their 90s, because I think everyone's kind of got an either dominant or submissive side to them. But yeah, interesting. But crushing is going a stage further, isn't it? Like, I think there was a YouTuber called Pyrocynical. Have you seen it?
No.
This is like one of my favorite content creators. But he got leaked. His DMs got leaked with someone, and his was he loved the idea of someone really fat like squashing someone else. It's such an unusual one.
Yeah.
Smoking fetish, which I don't think is really a fetish, but that's kind of like people being turned on by the watching someone smoking.
I reckon that's stemmed from like movies back in the day.
Yeah, it used to be really cool, didn't it? And now it's like not anywhere near as popular as it used to be. Hands, I get that quite a lot from my YouTube videos. If I ever show my hands, I'll get comments being like, please show your hands again. Because I kind of tend to do videos with my hands underneath the camera. When I like
bring
up my hands, they just go like, oh, maybe. I don't, not as if I have like particularly nice hands. People just love the kind of like their thing of hands. And tongues is the last one. So they're the sort of top. And that's kind of normal, I guess. Yeah. Licking stuff. But anyway, going on to, so I've got two weird ones that I've found. So I'll go into one, which is an attraction focused on inanimate objects. So have you ever heard any of this? So there's actually quite a lot of people that have married sort of like locations and inanimate objects. So in 1979, a Swedish woman married the Berlin Wall.
What?
It wasn't a legal marriage, obviously, but she still changed her name to Berliner Mauer, which is Berlin Wall in German. She said, the Great Wall of China is attractive, but he's too thick. My husband is sexier.
No, that can't be real.
Which is a shame as well, because the Berlin Wall got knocked down a couple of years later.
So she was devastated.
In 2007, Erica Eiffel married, can you guess?
Oh, all right,
yeah. The Eiffel Tower.
I thought that was an actual name.
No. In 2013, an Australian woman, Jodie Rose, married Le Pont de Diable, a bridge in France. In 2020, a Russian woman, Rain Gordon, married a briefcase, which is an odd one. So she bought the briefcase from a hardware store as a prop for a photo shoot and soon found herself falling in love with the item, which is now called Gideon. She said, I believe in animism, which means that there is life in everything. Just kind of a beautiful way of looking at life. But she says that Gideon is more than just a partner to me. He is a husband, a friend, and a mentor. Not sure how much mentoring he's doing. And then the final example is an artist, quite a famous UK artist. I'm sure you've heard of her, Tracy Emin. So in March 2016, she announced that she had married a rock. She made the relationship public at the opening of an exhibition of her work in Hong Kong, telling the press that she had exchanged vows with this sizable stone in the garden of her home in the south of France. I mean, I don't know how much of that was she was actually in love and it was like a artistic expression.
Yeah, a lot of it seems like an attention thing.
That almost certainly might be. Also, when she says that they exchanged vows, I'm not really sure how many vows the rock gave back. Yeah, but there's loads of them. I mean, honestly, I could go on for hours with the hundreds of cases that I found of people marrying their local train stations, their local churches. There's so many people that have this kind of infatuation for inanimate objects.
I found another attraction, which is one to machinery. So like bicycles, motor vehicles, helicopters, ships, aeroplanes, and it's called mechnophilia. Oh. So there was one case study similar to what you were saying. Obviously, there's thousands and probably tens of thousands of people that have relationships with inanimate objects. So this guy, Nathaniel, was a middle-aged man who had a relationship with his car. He called Chase, who he actually had some intimate experiences with as well.
Wow. And that was a homosexual relationship, was it, Chase? Is that...
Potentially.
Oh, no, you can have... No, Chase is a female name as well.
Yeah, potentially.
Just curious.
I don't know if...
No judgment either way, but...
If cars have genders or not, but...
So good question.
Yeah, so he was actually attracted to his car and not only just had a official marriage or bond that was on paper, he actually had intimate relations with his car.
Wow.
Yeah.
How odd.
Bizarre. And there was also Michelle Koki, who's a 33-year-old female who had a 5-year relationship with her Boeing 737-800.
My word, that is a big...
She said, the 737-800 is very attractive and sexy to me. He's the most beautifully built and very attractive and elegant aircraft I've ever seen.
Wow, gorgeous aircraft, but that is... God, you never feel like man enough if you dated... Also, what happens after 5 years? The plane's like, honestly, I want to travel more.
Yeah, I'm not in the same location anymore.
Yeah,
I'm moving airports.
I just need to spread my wings and fly a bit before I get tied down. Kind of tying in with inanimate objects again, and kind of almost the same kind of thing, is an interest in statues, dolls, mannequins, or other figurative objects, which kind of makes more sense because they're inanimate objects, but you've got the human attraction, you've got attractive statues and stuff. So it comes from the ancient Greek agalma, statue, and philia, love. So it's agalmatophilia. Seem to be really prevalent in the ancient world. I'm guessing they had less, how would you put it, adult media to consume. So you don't have the internet to Google what, and you don't necessarily see naked people walking around. So if you've got these statues of, women with their tops off, that might be almost give you the same feeling as when you saw your first naked person online. But but even then it's, that there are sort of loads of stories from the ancient world where sort of people would genuinely fall in love with statues. They would be caught being intimate with them. But there was one quite funny one. So someone wrote into the Daily Mail called Raina Delaney. So she was a 40-year-old woman from London. She claimed she had fallen in love with a 3-foot statue of the Greek god Adonis that she'd bought for £395. To be fair, Greek god, they are pretty attractive.
Yeah.
3 foot, short king.
Yeah.
Come on.
We love it.
But she says that she enjoys reading and talking to her companion and keeps him close by when she watches TV and eats dinner. She also kisses and caresses him, imagining the pair of them walking through meadows of wildflowers or at the seaside. She shares the condition with Amanda Whitaker, a 27-year-old shop assistant from Leeds, who has fallen head over heels with not a 3-foot statue, but a much larger one, the Statue of Liberty.
No way.
So people just, for some reason, just absolutely love statues. And I wonder if these people will move on to, the modern advancements of intimate dolls that are, becoming more and more common. But you get loads of people that, you sort of see programs and weird YouTube videos of people going like, I'm a man, no woman has ever been interested in me, but I've got this absolutely gorgeous
That's
doll.
loyal.
Like,
it's not going to cheat on me.
We have
People
dinner.
love it, yeah.
And they sort of say like, oh, they don't smell like real girls do. Like they'll never get stinky or dirty or in the toilet. They're almost like perfectly clean. There's almost like a weird kind of, I don't know, supremacy about the way they talk about it as well. That kind of just gives me shivers. It's a bit,
it's horrid.
It's a bit unusual, but I think, if they're not hurting anyone, go for it. But I mean, did you have any more?
Yeah, similar, I guess. Like it's a massive kind of increase in people using like those kind of toys or they're almost very real like models of human beings and they'll use that as a form of pleasure. So there's one that's called plushophilia, which is an attraction to stuffed toy animals. So I guess similar in the sense that it's that loyalty thing of just knowing they're always there and people actually develop relationships with them, which is bizarre.
That's weird because I grew up with a teddy and a snow leopard that were given to me by my sister and granddad, and I definitely growing up kind of saw them as people, as like entities that I like loved. And even now, I mean, like I'm a grown adult, like I'm in my mid-20s, but like if I think my teddy's probably still on my bed at home in my mum's house that I obviously just haven't lived at for years, but if someone like threw it to the floor, even now I'd be like, oh, like that could hurt them. Like you kind of do like give them this personality and identity, but I would never see any kind of it going that stage further and having that kind of like adult
you gotta be
interest
very
in.
lonely.
Yeah, I guess it's just a natural thing that probably just comes to these people. There's one thing, like I think with almost all of the Philias, I'm like, if you've got a weird interest in statues or inanimate objects or whatever they are, as long as it's not animals or kids related, it's fine. Like, it's when it's like rabbits and kid related stuff. I'm like,
cars is dodgy.
But I don't think it's really hurting anyone. If someone wants to fall in love with their car and
Still
have fun
nice.
with the exhaust at night. I
What?
don't really care. But stuff like that, where it's like there's kind of an association with plushy toys and kids. Or, if people like, they like the whole schoolgirl thing, or like these like anime girls that are like, look like they're 12, but they're actually like 4,000 years old in the law. There's something unsettling about that I just really don't like. Or the dolls where, people go like, oh, I've bought this doll and it's like 3 foot tall and it like looks like a kid. And
that's
like,
when you got to keep a close eye on that person.
Yeah, exactly. There needs to be some kind of register that's
literally.
Be careful for these people. But no, I think just wrapping up, I think the brain is, the human brain is just so strange, isn't it? I mean, there's so much that can go wrong or deviate from what's normal. Evidently, there's a lot of things that we're scared of, that whether it's rational or not, or be interested in. And I think with fears and stuff, and, fears are pretty natural. I think with phobias, if you've got phobias, there is actually quite a lot of really good ways for you to be able to handle it and get over it these days. So, if you've got a phobia and you're struggling with it, especially in social settings, you can get a decent therapy for it that can really help you. But and if you've got a philia, I'd say as long as you're not hurting anyone or there's no weird connotations with it and you're
just
not hurting
don't tell anyone.
It's it's fine if you're loving your car, but I find stuff like this so interesting about you could be walking down the road, it could be your boss or your teacher or something, and they could just have a weird attraction to microphones or the way grass feels on their naked feet or something, just really.
But also
really weird.
Looking into the stats, it's almost like if you feel like you do have a strange fetish or phobia, someone else probably does have that as well.
True.
I mean, there's some real unique ones that we've discussed, but it's mad the actual statistics behind it and the proportion of people that have experienced these things. So I think even talking about it, I find it so interesting because it's not something that you ever really think about, like, or even believe a lot of these cases as well.
Yeah. And some of it goes so strong. So just as a kind of like closing off on stats, about 15 to 20% of us experience specific phobias at one part of our life. So it is a lot. And I actually wouldn't be surprised if it was slightly more in a certain sense. It's estimated that nearly 10% of people have at least one extreme specific fear. And it all comes from the part of the brain called the amygdala, which is responsible for triggering specific phobias. So it's the integrative center for emotions, emotional behavior, and motivation. But yeah, it is really sad for people who have the more difficult ones that affect their lives, because nearly 17% of people with social phobias develop depression as a result of it, and 20% turn to illegal drugs or alcohol. So you can definitely seek treatment for your anxiety and fears and stuff, because only 40% of people begin treatment before the age of 10, whereas 95% start before the age of 20. But still, there are 5% of people out there that are still dealing with it without ever having help. So, if you've got one that you're really struggling with, go seek help for it. But I mean, the comment section is there. So if you're on YouTube or you want to go on our social media and you've got any interesting fears or phobias or Philias, and you want to open up and comment and, share with people or discuss, or there's any weird ones you've heard about, definitely tell us, because it's a really interesting topic, isn't it?
Yeah, and if you do have latrophobia, fear of doctors, then I honestly don't know what to advise.
Yeah.
Just still seek help.
It's impossible to say, isn't it? Because even if they know that they should.
A combination of latrophobia and phobophobia.
Oh my goodness.
You are done for.
Yeah, you're toast. So anyway, at fredarthurpod or fredarthurpod.com for links to everything. Just go check it out. Follow us on our social media. Get involved in the discussion. Huge thank you to everyone who's listened this far as well. We really appreciate everyone who's listening to the end of the podcasts. It means a lot. Glad you're enjoying it enough to share this time with us until the end. And
make sure to share with your friends, and we really appreciate you watching, and make sure to follow our socials.
Yeah, thanks a lot, and see you next time.
Thank you.